this was happening in the US financial system. It was writing a form of what one might call earthquake insurance. Essentially, it was protecting people against a collapse of the system and collecting the premium for it, but not setting aside the reserves for the day when the system actually collapsed. They were taking out the money as it came in through bonuses, through share repurchases, through dividends, leaving the system largely decapitalized so that when the events of the last year hit, and this was effectively the earthquake, when it actually hit, there's not enough capital in the system to pay for the risks that had been taken. Okay? So as a result, what we've had in the last year or so is a decapitalized U.S. financial system scrambling to avoid default, scrambling to avoid inflicting pain and suffering on the rest of the financial system and on the rest of the economy. Unfortunately, because banks are so central to the economy, the U.S. government has had to bail these entities out. We've had the $700 billion TARP investments, which are still ongoing, and there will be more capital which will be infused into the U.S. banking system. Now, the problem, however, is the U.S. is not an island. It is the single largest economy in the world, and the effects of the United States are felt around the world. It's first felt in the United States alone. The first effect was on U.S. households as they saw the breakdown of the U.S. financial system, as they saw their wealth disappear, they cut back on consumption. And remember, these were the guys who were consuming and providing the demand the rest of the world wanted. So what we've seen in the last 3 months is a dramatic slowdown in exports around the world. We in India have experienced it, a 12% fall in exports last month, year on year. China is experiencing it. Around the world, we've seen a reduction in exports as the U.S. economy has slowed. That's the first shock that has hit India. The second shock that is hitting India is through the financial system. We keep saying India is a relatively closed economy, but India relies on the world for savings. A lot of foreign inflows have made their way into the U.S. financial system, and overnight, these inflows stopped coming in. As a result, overnight, the Indian financial system suffered substantially, a substantial loss in flows, a substantial shortfall in credit. And many of you companies are seeing that as bankers are unwilling to lend. They are unwilling to lend in part because a huge chunk of money that was coming into the system no longer coming into the system. The third factor that's affecting the Indian economy today is that we had monetary policy tightening in the past because there was a fear that we would have runaway inflation. Those effects are still being felt. Even though the RBI has turned to cutting interest rates, we are seeing the lagged effects of the tightening. The lagged effects are showing up in higher interest rates, which have killed auto sales. Auto sales have fallen through the floor. Commercial vehicle sales have fallen. Housing is falling. Real estate companies are in trouble. All this because of higher interest rates. It will turn around as interest rates come down, and they will come down in some time, but it is part of the effects of the global downturn. Now, what should we do in India? What should we do to respond to this downturn? The first thing is to recognize where the problem is. Unlike the US, the problem is not that households have stopped consuming. Yes, we hear stories every day about some BPO people laid off, some IT people laid off, some people in good firms being laid off. But this is the exception rather than the norm. In general, consumption in India is not going to fall off that much, except in certain interest rate sensitive areas like automobiles. The real fall off in India is in investment. Many companies, I don't know how many here, have put investment plans on hold as they see global demand being stressed, as they see India slowing down a little bit, as they see interest rates high, investment has been put on a shelf. So what we need to do is tackle the conditions that slow down investment and not try and generate huge sops to the consumer. That's not where the need of the hour is. It's really needed in terms of generating investment, which means we need to focus on making sure that over time interest rates come down. We need to focus on making sure that credit from the banking system flows to industry and to the retail households, that EMIs come down over time, that credit is available at a decent price, which means the spreads have to come down. But perhaps most important, we also need to re-energize infrastructure spending, because that will be a source of additional investment demand in India. And for that, it's not just a question of providing finance to investment, to infrastructure investment. It is also about completing, executing the infrastructure projects that we have on the anvil. We have to adopt a war footing in making sure that what we are trying to do, what we have planned to do for a long time, actually is accelerated and comes on track very quickly. That will be the way we will get salvation. Of course, every industry at this point has its own plan for what the government can do for it, right? Across the world, everyone has their own private bailout plan. The problem is government resources are limited, and we need to find where is the place where the government can have the biggest bang for its buck. And in my view, at this point, infrastructure spending, accelerating that, is probably where we can do the most good for the Indian economy. Let me now turn to the last point, and I want to conclude after that, which is that, of course, people are looking around the world at this point and saying, oh, the free enterprise system is doomed. You trusted markets too much. Things have gone, things have gone wrong. We should shelve all this and go back to a state-dominated system. Because after all, when push comes to shove, it's the government which we all depend on. The government is the savior of last resort. I think, economists for a long time, Karl Marx said it, have been suggesting that the capitalist system is prone to crisis. And it is prone to crisis. Crises do happen. But I think what we've also seen that in the long run, the capitalist free enterprise system is the one that promotes the most growth. I'm not talking about monopoly capitalism here. I'm not talking about license permit Raj here. I'm talking about the free enterprise kind of system which many of us have benefited from in the last few years in India. It's a system where you can go out with an idea, raise money, set up a factory, and generate a lot of wealth in a short time. It's a system where you take risks. It's a system where you innovate. It's a system where you get to be in one generation or two moving from a third world country, which South Korea was in the 1960s, to a first world country in the 1980s. It's a very different system from a state-dominated system that North Korea has. Look at the difference between those two economies. Which would you rather prefer to be in, South Korea or North Korea? South Korea has faced 4 crises since the 1960s, but it is in a far better place than North Korea, which hasn't faced a single crisis, but has stayed at an abysmal level of growth all throughout, right?